In the brutal winter of 1856, deep in Missouri's Ozark Mountains, twin sisters Mercy and Temperance Blackwood hid monstrous secrets behind their masks as mountain healers. For over a decade, their remote Devil's Den Hollow cabin lured traveling men into a horrifying web of ritualistic sexual coercion, acts they claimed were sacred. When young Declan Murphy vanished, his father Silas refused to stay silent. What the sheriff uncovered beneath their home revealed a chilling reign of terror. Why did the community protect them? What dark faith fueled their crimes? This is the haunting story of the Blackwood sisters and the man who stopped them. Subscribe to join our mission of uncovering history's buried truths, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and your local time. In the harsh winter of 1854, Devil's Den Hollow existed as one of the most isolated and forbidding places in the Missouri Ozarks, a natural basin carved from limestone and surrounded by towering bluffs that rose like ancient fortifications against the sky. The hollow lay 40 miles northeast of Springfield, accessible only through treacherous mountain paths that became completely impassable during the fierce winter storms that regularly swept through the region. Snow could trap residents for months at a time, cutting them off from the outside world as effectively as if they lived on a distant island. The nearest settlement, Cedar Ridge, sat 12 miles away through terrain so dangerous that even experienced mountain men avoided traveling it alone during the worst weather. It was into this brutal landscape that Mercy and Temperance Blackwood had arrived in the autumn of 1843, claiming to be the sole survivors of a Kentucky family decimated by cholera. The twin sisters, then 21 years old, appeared at Cedar Ridge, leading a single mule laden with mysterious bundles wrapped in oiled cloth, speaking in the careful cadence of educated women despite their worn traveling clothes and weathered hands. They told anyone who asked that their grandmother had taught them the healing arts before succumbing to the same disease that claimed their parents, leaving them with nothing but knowledge of herbs and an urgent need to find somewhere they could practice their skills in peace. The mountain communities of the Missouri Ozarks in 1843 were desperate for any kind of medical assistance. Formal doctors were scarce, often located hundreds of miles away in larger settlements, and childbirth frequently meant death for both mother and child in a region where help could take weeks to arrive. When the Blackwood sisters demonstrated their knowledge of herbal remedies and midwifery techniques, they were welcomed with the gratitude reserved for those who could mean the difference between life and death during medical emergencies. The twins chose to settle in an abandoned trapper's cabin deep within Devil's Den Hollow, a structure that had sat empty for 3 years, since its previous occupant had vanished under circumstances that local residents preferred not to discuss in detail. The cabin's isolation suited the sisters perfectly, they explained, as their work required quiet concentration and access to the wild herbs that grew abundantly in the hollow's protected environment. They spent their first winter reinforcing the structure and establishing gardens for medicinal plants, venturing out only when summoned by families facing medical crises. Mercy emerged as the more practical of the twins, handling deliveries and treating injuries with an authoritative manner that inspired confidence in desperate families. Her extensive knowledge of herbal preparations and surgical techniques surpassed even the folk remedies passed down through generations of mountain families. She could stop bleeding, reduce fevers, and ease difficult births with methods that seemed almost miraculous to people accustomed to watching loved ones die from treatable conditions. Temperance focused on what mountain folk called the sight, demonstrating an uncanny ability to predict weather patterns, deaths, and other significant events with accuracy that both impressed and unsettled her neighbors. She would appear at cabins hours before labor began, arriving with supplies as if she had known assistance would be needed. Her predictions of harsh winters or early springs proved reliable enough that families began planning their seasonal activities around her forecasts. By the winter of 1854, the twins had become indispensable to the scattered mountain communities, their reputation spreading through the network of family connections that bound the isolated settlements together. Yet even as grateful families praised their life-saving interventions, subtle signs emerged that suggested something darker beneath their benevolent facade. Neighbors began noting strange lights emanating from the hollow on moonless nights, flickering through the trees like signals or ritual fires. The twins insisted on being paid not in money or traditional goods, but in specific items that struck some as peculiar: iron nails, coarse salt, and red thread, materials that older residents associated with folk magic practices their grandparents had brought from Scotland and Ireland. Most unsettling was the sisters' particular interest in unmarried men who passed through the region, questioning them extensively about their family histories and physical characteristics in ways that seemed to go beyond normal curiosity about strangers. When 22-year-old Declan Murphy failed to return from delivering grain to the Blackwood cabin in October 1856, his father Silas faced a nightmare that would expose the inadequacies of frontier law enforcement and the deadly consequences of community silence. Sheriff Josiah Crawford, a former Union Army scout who had accepted the county sheriff position in 1852, found himself confronting an investigation that would test every skill he had acquired during his military service in the Mexican-American War. The challenge before him was staggering: investigating disappearances across hundreds of square miles of wilderness with only 2 deputies, no modern communication systems, and communities that viewed outside authority with deep suspicion. Crawford's initial assessment revealed the impossible nature of his task. The Blackwood cabin sat in a jurisdictional gray area between counties, with unclear boundaries that had never been properly surveyed or legally established. Previous missing persons cases had never been officially reported to his office, as mountain families preferred handling such matters through their own informal networks rather than involving what they termed government men. The nearest telegraph lines ended in Springfield, 40 miles away, making communication with other law enforcement agencies a matter of days rather than hours. Physical evidence degraded rapidly in the humid, wildlife-rich environment of the Ozarks, where scavengers and weather could eliminate traces of human activity within weeks. The sheriff's methodical approach began with interviewing mountain families who had interacted with the Blackwood sisters over their 13 years in the region. What he discovered was a wall of carefully constructed responses that praised the twins' healing abilities while avoiding any direct discussion of the disappeared men. Family after family offered identical testimonials about successful births and recovered illnesses, but conversations ended abruptly when Crawford pressed for details about male visitors to the cabin. Several women made cryptic references to old mountain ways and things best left buried, but refused to elaborate even when Crawford explained the serious nature of his investigation. The breakthrough in understanding the twins' methodology came through Crawford's discovery of a disturbing pattern in the timing of disappearances. Every missing man had vanished during specific lunar phases, coinciding with what local residents carefully termed the twins' ritual seasons. These periods, occurring roughly every 3 months, were marked by the sisters' temporary withdrawal from their usual medical practice and their insistence that any male visitors during these times come to the cabin alone, without witnesses or companions. Crawford's persistence finally yielded crucial testimony when 19-year-old Benjamin Thorne admitted to visiting the cabin in September 1856, seeking treatment for persistent respiratory problems that threatened his ability to work during harvest season. Thorne's account revealed the terrifying reality of what occurred inside the isolated cabin during the twins' ritual periods. He described arriving to find the interior transformed from the familiar medical workspace neighbors had described into something resembling a ceremonial chamber, with ropes hanging from the rafters, herbs arranged in circular patterns across the floor, and what appeared to be human bones suspended like decorative elements throughout the room. The young man's strong constitution had allowed him to resist the effects of an herbal preparation the twins had attempted to administer, giving him the clarity to recognize the danger of his situation and flee before they could complete whatever ritual they had planned. His description provided Crawford with the first detailed evidence that the disappearances were not random acts of violence, but part of a systematic pattern that had been operating for years under the protection of community silence. Crawford's investigation intensified when he organized search parties to explore the cave systems that honeycombed the limestone bluffs surrounding Devil's Den Hollow. Hidden in a cavern half a mile from the cabin, searchers discovered a cache of personal belongings that confirmed the worst fears about the fate of the missing men. Among the items carefully preserved in the dry cave environment were Marcus Webb's distinctive silver cross, Tobias Fletcher's leather merchant goods, and most significantly, clothing and personal effects from at least 10 different men spanning more than a decade. Sheriff Crawford's deeper investigation into the Blackwood twins' background revealed a disturbing origin story that explained the twisted belief system driving their systematic crimes. Through careful questioning of older mountain residents who had known the sisters longer, Crawford pieced together their history. The twins had been raised in eastern Kentucky by their paternal grandmother following their parents' death from cholera when they were 8 years old. This grandmother, known throughout the region as a granny woman, had taught them a dangerous amalgamation of Scottish Highland folk magic and Cherokee spiritual practices she had acquired during the forced removal period of the 1830s. The grandmother's teachings, as Crawford gradually uncovered through interviews with Kentucky residents who remembered the family, centered on the belief that certain bloodlines carried ancient supernatural power that could only be preserved through ritualized conception during sacred lunar phases. According to this perverted spiritual framework, children born from these ceremonies would inherit abilities that could maintain the balance between the natural and supernatural worlds. The grandmother had convinced the young twins that they were among the chosen few responsible for preventing the complete loss of these ancient powers as traditional mountain culture gave way to modern civilization. Crawford's investigation revealed the methodical nature of the twins' victim selection process. Through testimonies from survivors and analysis of the personal effects found in the cave, he determined that Mercy and Temperance identified potential victims based on specific physical characteristics they believed indicated carriers of old blood, red hair, left-handedness, distinctive birthmarks, and unusual eye colors. These traits, according to their grandmother's teachings, marked men whose bloodlines traced back to the ancient Celtic and indigenous peoples who had once possessed supernatural abilities. The twins' methodology became clearer as Crawford interviewed more community members who finally broke their silence. The sisters would lure chosen men to their cabin under the pretext of medical consultation, often claiming to have remedies for chronic ailments or offering to examine mysterious symptoms. Once isolated in the cabin, victims were administered powerful herbal concoctions that induced a state of compliance while preserving enough consciousness for them to participate in the ritual conception process. The drugs, derived from plants the twins cultivated in their hidden gardens, created a dreamlike state that left victims confused about what had occurred and unable to provide coherent accounts of their experiences. The most horrifying aspect of Crawford's investigation emerged when he realized the twins had been successful in their twisted mission. Local birth records, cross-referenced with the timing of disappearances, revealed several cases of unexplained infant deaths attributed to various natural causes, but occurring in a pattern that suggested systematic infanticide. The twins had apparently murdered children who failed to display the supernatural abilities they expected, viewing these deaths not as the killing of innocents, but as necessary elimination of failed experiments. Crawford's interviews with several married mountain men revealed the true scope of the twins' activities and the psychological terror they had inflicted on the community for over a decade. These men, speaking in confidence and with obvious shame, described unexplained memory gaps after visiting the cabin for legitimate medical reasons. They recounted nightmarish dreams that featured elements too specific and disturbing to be dismissed as mere nightmares, sensations of restraint, the taste of bitter herbs, and fragmented memories of participating in activities they would never have consented to while in full possession of their faculties. The investigation took its most devastating turn when Crawford's search of the cabin grounds led to the discovery of a concealed root cellar beneath the main structure. In this underground chamber, searchers found Declan Murphy's body, bearing evidence of prolonged captivity and systematic abuse. The young man's remains showed signs of restraint marks, malnutrition from weeks of captivity, and exposure to the same herbal compounds found throughout the cabin. Most disturbing were the ritualistic elements surrounding his death, suggesting the twins had been preparing for a final ceremony when circumstances forced them to kill their victim prematurely. The root cellar also contained additional evidence of the twins' escalating violence. Bone fragments from multiple victims, ritual implements crafted from human remains, and detailed records of their activities written in Mercy's precise handwriting, documenting years of systematic abuse with the clinical detachment of scientific observation. When Sheriff Crawford delivered the devastating news of Declan Murphy's fate to his father Silas, the Irish immigrant's world collapsed in ways that went beyond simple grief. The discovery of his son's tortured remains, combined with the revelation that neighbors had maintained deliberate silence about the twins' sinister reputation, transformed Silas from a marginalized outsider into a man driven beyond the boundaries of rational action. Crawford's careful explanation of the evidence found in the root cellar, the weeks of captivity, the systematic abuse, the ritualistic elements surrounding Declan's death, ignited a rage in the 55-year-old farmer that no legal process could satisfy. Crawford faced an impossible situation as he attempted to build a case against the twins through proper legal channels. Despite the overwhelming physical evidence and growing testimonies from community members who finally began breaking their silence, the sheriff encountered insurmountable obstacles at every turn. No reliable witnesses were willing to testify publicly against the twins, fearing both supernatural retribution and social ostracism from neighbors who preferred handling mountain problems internally. The jurisdictional complications between counties meant that any trial would face lengthy delays and procedural challenges that could allow the twins to escape justice entirely. Most problematically, the twins had begun making veiled threats about revealing embarrassing secrets concerning prominent community members who had been victims of their drugging and ritual abuse. Several respected mountain men, including a local judge and the region's most successful merchant, faced the terrifying prospect of having their victimization exposed in public testimony, creating pressure to suppress the case rather than pursue it through the courts. The situation reached crisis point when Crawford learned through his network of informants that the twins were planning to complete their ritual cycle with one final ceremony on December 21, 1856, the winter solstice, which their twisted belief system regarded as the most sacred night of the year. Their intended victim was the 16-year-old son of the local mill owner, a boy whose red hair and prominent family position made him both an ideal target according to their selection criteria and someone whose disappearance could never be explained away through the usual rationalizations. Silas Murphy, learning of the twins' plans through his own desperate investigation into his son's death, made the decision that would define the case's violent resolution. On the evening of December 21st, as the longest night of the year descended over the Ozark Mountains, the Irish immigrant approached the Blackwood cabin, armed with his military-issued rifle from his service in the Mexican-American War. His plan was simple and final: prevent another family from experiencing the horror his own had endured. The confrontation unfolded with deadly swiftness in the flickering candlelight of the cabin's main room. Murphy arrived to find the twins in the midst of their ritual preparations, with the mill owner's son already drugged and restrained according to their established methodology. Temperance was arranging herbs in the circular patterns that marked their ceremonial space, while Mercy consulted the detailed journal where she recorded the spiritual significance of each ritual element. Neither sister showed any recognition that their activities were criminal. They remained convinced until their final moments that they were serving a higher spiritual purpose. Murphy's rifle shots killed both twins instantly, ending their 13-year reign of terror before they could complete their final ritual. The mill owner's son, found alive but heavily drugged, would later provide crucial testimony about the twins' psychological state during their final hours. Even facing imminent death, they had maintained their unshakable belief that their actions were divinely mandated, viewing their victims not as human beings deserving of dignity and life, but as necessary components in preserving ancient supernatural powers. Crawford arrived at the cabin within hours of the killings, too late to prevent Murphy's vigilante justice, but in time to document the scene that would provide definitive evidence of the twins' crimes. The sheriff found ritual implements arranged throughout the cabin, dozens of personal items from victims spanning over a decade, and most significantly, Mercy's detailed journal documenting their activities with clinical precision that revealed the full scope of their systematic abuse. Silas Murphy's trial for the killing of the Blackwood twins began in the spring of 1857, but what should have been a straightforward case of vigilante justice became something entirely different as the full scope of the twins' crimes emerged through testimony and evidence presentation. The Irish immigrant who had been marginalized and suspected by mountain society for nearly a decade suddenly found himself transformed into a community protector, with neighbors who had previously avoided his family now offering support and character testimony on his behalf. The prosecutor, faced with overwhelming evidence of the twins' systematic crimes and community sentiment supporting Murphy's actions, pursued only manslaughter charges rather than murder, acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances that had driven a grieving father to take justice into his own hands. The twins' journal, read aloud during Murphy's trial, provided the most chilling evidence of their 13-year reign of terror. Mercy's meticulous handwriting documented at least 12 men killed between 1843 and 1856, with detailed descriptions of victim, selection criteria, ritual preparations, and the clinical observation of their victims' final hours. The journal entries revealed the twins' complete lack of remorse or recognition that their actions constituted criminal behavior, treating human suffering as spiritual experimentation necessary for preserving what they believed were ancient supernatural powers. Multiple pregnancies were documented, along with the systematic murder of infants who failed to demonstrate the abilities the twins expected, written about with the same detached tone used to describe weather patterns or seasonal changes. Sheriff Crawford used the case as a catalyst for implementing improved communication systems between isolated mountain communities and territorial law enforcement. The investigation had revealed dangerous gaps in missing persons procedures and the deadly consequences of jurisdictional confusion in rural crime cases. Crawford's detailed documentation of the Blackwood case became the foundation for Missouri territorial government initiatives to establish better reporting systems for disappearances and create precedents for cross-jurisdictional cooperation when crimes spanned county boundaries. Murphy received a sentence of 5 years for manslaughter, but community pressure and recognition of his role in protecting future victims led to his early release after serving only 18 months. Upon his return to the mountain community, the man who had once been an unwelcome outsider found himself welcomed as a respected member of the society that had initially rejected him. He spent his remaining years farming peacefully in the same region where his son had been murdered, dying of natural causes in 1871, with the gratitude of neighbors who recognized that his desperate act had saved lives. The Blackwood cabin was burned to its foundation by community members immediately following the twins' deaths, with the flames visible from settlements miles away as mountain families gathered to witness the destruction of the structure that had housed such systematic evil. Devil's Den Hollow itself became known locally as Dead Women's Den, a place avoided by travelers and marked by gradually fading cairns that warned strangers away from the cursed location. Nature slowly began reclaiming the site, with vegetation growing over the burned foundations and wild animals returning to territory they had seemed to avoid during the twins' occupation. The psychological impact on community members who had maintained complicit silence about the twins' activities created lasting trauma that affected multiple families for generations. Several households left the region entirely, unable to reconcile their knowledge of the twins' crimes with their failure to act sooner. Others struggled with profound guilt over their inaction, particularly those who had suspected something was wrong but chose community harmony over moral courage. The case became a cautionary tale passed down through mountain families about the dangers of allowing isolation to enable unchecked evil, and the deadly consequences of choosing silence over justice. The story's final chapter occurred in 1885, when a railroad survey team working through the region rediscovered the overgrown cabin ruins and found additional human remains that prompted a brief, renewed investigation. Among the artifacts recovered during this excavation was a final letter written by one of the twins' later victims, describing his growing realization of their true nature and his desperate but failed attempt to escape their underground prison. This letter, preserved in county records, provided the final piece of documentary evidence confirming the full extent of the horror that had unfolded in Devil's Den Hollow, ensuring that the victim's suffering would be remembered and that the twins' crimes would serve as a permanent warning about the capacity for evil that can flourish in isolation.